Congresswoman Virginia Foxx as part of American Compass's series that we've just released this week called Retooling American Education. It's a symposium looking at all the different policy levers that are available to policymakers to start moving our education system away from a college for all model and toward one that actually serves most students on the pathways where they're likely to be successful. And so we are delighted to have Congresswoman Virginia Foxx here for this conversation. Dr. Foxx is one of the few leaders on this topic with actual real world experience, having served as both an instructor at and president of a community college. And today she's the ranking member of the House Education and Labor Committee. So welcome, Dr. Foxx. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Oren. I'm honored that you invited me to be with you.
Well, we could probably fill much more than 30 minutes, but I guess we'll jump right in. I would love to start by just asking you a little bit about your thoughts on what is wrong with the education system today. We've been very critical at American Compass of what we call the sort of college for all model, and would love to hear your thoughts on whether that's a fair description of what we do today and what you see as the biggest problems with how we're trying to prepare young people for their lives.
Well, Oren, welcome to the club. I've been talking about this since at least 1969. I'll tell you a very quick story, which most people hear if they talk to me for very long. I have a younger brother who was graduating from high school in 1969. And he said to me one day, I don't want to go to college, but I don't want you and mom and daddy to be ashamed of me. Now, Oren, we grew up very, very poor. And my brother, I have a younger brother, 3 years younger, who did go to college, dropped out, went to the military, then went back. Then I have this brother and a sister who didn't go to college at all. But both my younger brother and sister, the ones who didn't go to college, are as smart or smarter than I am. I will tell you that. So I said to my brother, what do you want to do? He said, I want to be a carpenter. I said, well, that's a pretty honorable profession. And I was working at a place called Beach Mountain at the time. We were desperate for skilled people. And I said, well, I don't want you to just go out and get a job with a contractor, which he could have done in a heartbeat. But let me see what I can do about setting up an apprenticeship program. I don't even know, Oren, how I knew to do that. But I went to my boss. We got an carpentry apprenticeship program going. My brother and 16 guys took classes at night at the local junior college that were sponsored by the contractors and the community colleges, which had just begun in North Carolina 4 years before that. And 3.5 years later, he received his journeyman license. So my goal then was to have him be able to prove he was a good carpenter. And he didn't stay in the business. He became, quote, an engineer with Sprint telephone. But he's the one who showed me how to buy my first desktop computer, set it up for me, taught me how to use it. Now, I went on, I got a master's degree. I went on and got a doctorate. But my brother built his own house, flies his own airplane. He doesn't have a degree. But he taught me then that we have established a two-tier system in our country where we value people with a degree more than we value people without a degree. And that is wrong, because 70% of the people in our country don't have a degree. And they're the ones primarily who make this country work. Now, I was academically inclined. I didn't have many other talents. I took typing in high school. Thank goodness I did. And again, I worked hard because we were so poor. I've been working since I was 12 years old. I learned how to weave early on. I learned how to do a lot of things, how to farm. So I have skills, and they would be marketable, but I was inclined to go into academics. I was inspired to do that. So I need those degrees. But most of the people in our country don't need a college degree to be successful. I mean, you can be like my brother, you can make good money, you can have a satisfying life, and guess what? Be a lifelong learner. I'll use one other example. My husband, who's 79 years old, did get a degree in political science from UNC Chapel Hill, but he's a lifelong learner. He's on the computer all the time, learning how to do new things and learning of his own interests. He probably could get another degree, but the whole idea is we should have people match up their interest and skills with programs that will give them the certification they need so that they can show people that they can do something.
I think the way you describe the two-tier system is exactly right. It is the sort of heart of the problem that we have. Where do you see that coming from? It's funny that you're describing it. It's starting all the way back in the 60s. It's a problem that has been with us for a very long time. Part of it is probably cultural. Part of it is decisions that policymakers have made. Where do you put the most blame, and where would you start in trying to undo some of it?
Well, I don't know if blame is the right way to say it, but you're right. And as I think about it, nobody's asked me that question before, so I'm having to put on my thinking cap. We started right after World War II pushing college for men coming home from the war, partly because we had terrible inflation, and inflation was going up, salaries were going up, and I think part of it was that, and also sort of a reward for the people who fought in the war. I don't know if anybody's written about this or not. And then it picked up steam. As I said, this conversation with my brother occurred in 1969. I didn't remember in 1961 graduating from high school that was such a big issue. So in a short period of time, it became a big issue, 70s and 80s. So yes, I think it's also driven by, again, the 50s were a wonderful time in our country, the 60s, a little turmoil, but people thinking their children should do better than they were doing. So working class people thought, and partly it's a media issue. Again, I've never thought about it this way, but every few weeks you see an article, oh, if you get a college degree, you earn this much more money than if you don't get a college degree. So it really is an indoctrination. And let's face it, my guess is a large part of it comes from the, I'll call it post-secondary establishment. I try to get away from calling it the higher education establishment because frankly, Oren, I don't think higher order skills are being taught in most of our colleges and universities. And I taught at Appalachian State University for 15 years. So you mentioned my background. I was on the school board for 12 years. I taught at Appalachian for 15. I was a community college president for 7. But I've always been involved in education. And I truly believe in education as a way to improve your life. But it doesn't mean that when you graduate from high school, you need to enroll in a baccalaureate institution to get a degree.
Yeah, and I love your point about higher education. I've taken to just calling it Big Ed because to some degree, I believe it's one of the largest lobbying groups actually in Washington at this point. And I think you're right that what they are marketing themselves as is not necessarily what the American people are getting for it. But community college is such an interesting sort of in-between place. It's actually something I've learned a lot about. I used to be just incredibly critical of our community college system because the completion rates are so low. And I think that's obviously a big problem. But the flip side is that really in a lot of ways, they're the ideal institutions in so many of our communities to do a lot of the kind of education that people do need. So I'm curious from your perspective, especially leading a community college, what did you see that was really working in our community college system and what wasn't working that would really need to change there?
Thank you. That's a great question. Um, I left Appalachian State University to go to a community college, again, because I saw the community colleges was where the action was. I saw at the university, and I actually was involved with a lot of innovative programs at Appalachian. Appalachian was doing a lot of things in the 70s and 80s, many of which they dropped, some of which they've gone back to. But I just happened to work with an extraordinarily innovative dean. I was assistant dean there and I taught sociology. But the presidency of Mayland Community College became available. It's 26 miles from where I live. It's in the community I grew up in. So I applied for that job and went there. And what I found was a sort of moribund school. They did not have good leadership before I went there. And I stirred the place up. But I think the emphasis on community is so important. And what you're there to do is serve the community. And you have a much greater opportunity to do that in terms of offering wide-ranging programs. Right after I went there, I went out to all the major companies in the area and said, what is it I can do for you? And they said nobody had ever done that before. And they wanted a supervisory class taught. So I put together a team of people from the college and brought in one consultant, and we designed a course for them that we taught. Others said, well, we need an industrial maintenance program, and we did that. So the idea of the community college is you can adapt quickly if you want to and offer the programs that are needed right there and then for the workforce. The average age at community colleges is older, although it's dropped in the last few years because more and more students are going there. And so they offer a practical education. But again, they can offer things, lifelong learning classes through continuing education. But the basic thing that they do, again, is respond. Now, the community colleges are criticized because they have very low graduation rates. But let's look at the other side of that. In many cases, students will come there, enroll in a program, get some skills, and because they have even limited skills, the employers will hire them. And so rather than they stay in the program, they're very practical minded, they go get the job. Now, the smart thing to do is for the community college to go to those employers and say, how can we help these students continue to learn in an organized fashion? And when I was at the community college, I really pushed the faculty to do certifications. So I would say almost every semester, create some sort of certification for the students so they can tell their employer what they can do. But I think even with community colleges, if you've got an innovative president, a president who's really dynamic, the community college can be fabulous. If they're not, they can become like the colleges and universities and really moribund or like battleships. You know, they can't turn very quickly. That's what we've always said about the colleges and universities. It's hard to turn a college or university as it is to turn a battleship. And so what I love about the community colleges is that they can quickly move to do things if they've got the right structure in the state.
Yeah, the point that people can leave, you know, if someone is not completing because they learned what they need and they've gone and gotten a job, that's of course very different. And it highlights that, you know, the degree, the degree is the means, not the end. The end is the skills and the employment. One model that we're highlighting in our symposium is something they do at Texas State Technical College, which is to track the actual earnings of all of the students who pass through. And then really their funding is almost entirely dependent on the earnings of the students, whether completer or non-completer that pass through their doors. From either as a policymaker or a former community college president, do you like that level of sort of direct connection to labor market outcomes?
Absolutely. I think we have too little accountability for what is happening in colleges and universities. and for that matter, in elementary and secondary education. We test way too much the students in elementary and secondary. And what we should do is measure better what the skills are. We think testing does that, but it really doesn't do that. So yes, I appreciate that. And Texas, I think, is being a real leader in this area at all levels. The university system is being much more transparent with parents. Here's how long it's going to take your student to complete the degree. This is what they're likely to earn. This is what their lifelong learning is going to be. So I really applaud Texas. I visited there a few years ago, community colleges and universities. I haven't stayed as much up to date with them as I'd like to, but I know they're leading the way in terms of accountability and doing the right kind of measurements as to their effectiveness.
Yeah, that was certainly my experience there as well. I want to shift over to the hard policy discussion and the sorts of reforms that are either before Congress or that you think should be coming before Congress. But as a way into that, maybe want to start with a slightly more philosophical question, which is, I think especially for Republicans and conservatives who care about limited government or want to make sure we're not spending too much money, the usual impulse is to say, well, let's just do less, right? What can we cut? And I think education and especially this kind of workforce development discussion is a place where, at least from my perspective, it's important to say, there's actually a conservative case here for needing public policy, for needing government to do something. But I'm curious for your perspective on that. How do you think about, what is the right role for government and spending and policy making when it comes to these kinds of issues?
Well, first, let me say I am a constitutional conservative. A lot of people use that expression. The word education is not in the Constitution as a responsibility for the federal government. And so I always begin there. I want people to understand that's where I begin. If the Lord put me in charge, I would get the federal government out of education, return that money to the states and the localities, and let them decide what to do. However, I'm not in charge. So I work with what I have. And so my approach is to take what we have and to make it as good as it can possibly be. So we do have the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. I was very instrumental in getting that passed. It was my bill in 2014. I think we passed it in 2013. It sat in the Senate for a while. I can't remember 2014, 2015. But our whole goal was to reform the workforce development programs under the aegis of the Education Committee. There are others not under our jurisdiction. And because I'd had the experience at the community college, I saw where a lot of the problems were. So our goal was to put employers in charge of workforce development, decrease the number of people on the workforce boards, decrease the bureaucrats, and put more employers on. So the goal is to have employers be more in charge of what's happening in workforce development. Unfortunately, our colleagues on the other side began with wanting to be bipartisan this session and come up with a reauthorization of WIOA, pardon me. But they passed a bill 2 weeks ago that we could not support. Because they basically diminished the role of employers, spent a lot of money that's unnecessary to spend, improve and increased the power of unions over the programs. And that is not, in my opinion, the way to go. We need very, very much to put employers in charge. It's their money. I mean, we're taking hardworking taxpayer dollars up to the federal government and passing it back to them. And my idea is those people need to be controlling how the spending is going. We need them on the boards. They know what's needed in their local area. They don't need to be told by Washington. all of these programs should be localized as much as possible, but we need accountability. You will hear me talk accountability and transparency over and over and over again, because without accountability, we're pouring money down a rat hole.
And I guess that connects also to the student loan debate that's going on right now. I can probably guess what you think of just for giving student loans. I think I know you've said it, in fact, on many occasions, but I'm curious what you would do with that situation. How should we deal with the amount of student loan debt out there today, and then making sure that we're not just continuing to recreate the problem going forward?
Well, you're correct. Student loans were a contract. People signed on the dotted line. Over the years, my husband and I have had to borrow money. We were in business. We always paid it back. That is a value in our culture. You agree to do something, you do it. So I am totally opposed to loan forgiveness in the way the president and his people are talking about it. There are already programs. We have way too many complicated programs to pay back loans and to help people who are truly struggling. But what the Democrats want to do, they're going to pay back the loans or forgive the loans. I should say, let me say it the right way, transfer the debt that these people took on to enrich their lives to people who never had a chance to go to college. That's wrong. We should not be transferring wealth. And that's what President Obama wanted to do, was transfer wealth. So that's what the Democrats are proposing to do if they do blanket forgiveness. They're going to be helping the wealthiest people in this country by taking away an obligation that they have and that they made of their own free will. And all that's going to do is keep the price of colleges and universities high, because what incentive is there for the colleges and universities to hold down their cost or to be more accountable if the taxpayers, and let's not say federal government, let's make it clear, the taxpayers are going to continue to give the money without any accountability. That's just wrong.
And the Higher Education Act, I know, is one that is coming up. Putting aside whether it should be renamed something else, the question of how the government should be involved, I think it's pretty clear that the way that the government has really encouraged people to take on the loans, subsidized the loans, has really fueled the crisis in a lot of ways. How would you want to see the government playing a role in financing going forward, if at all, if the government should have any role in helping people afford tuition?
Well, again, I would say if I had my way, I would not have the federal government involved. But the federal government is involved, and I am not going to be able to undo that all on my own. So I would like to see us really reform post-secondary education. I would like us to have transparency. Again, I want parents and students to know what they're walking into, how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take them to get the degree, what's the likelihood that they will get a job that requires that degree, what are they likely to get paid, what predictions can they make? I mean, I know the world is changing very rapidly, but people should walk into it with their eyes wide open. Can they afford it? I want them to know they're not going to be subject to illiberal indoctrination while they're there. That's going to be a little tougher to do. I want the accrediting bodies. Oren, we could spend an hour and a half or 2 hours talking about this, but really quickly, we've got to change the way accreditation is done. We've got to be focused on education. I love liberal education. Do not get me wrong. I got a liberal education, but I want the education that our students are getting to be practical to them in terms of their lives and what it's going to mean to them about getting a job. So we're going to have to change, I think, the way our accreditation is done. There is so much. And if we are going to help students who are low income students, again, there has to be some accountability to the institutions. I'd like the institutions to have skin in the game. And I believe this is going to happen more and more. They're admitting students who cannot do the work. They don't hold them accountable while they're there. They allow them to stay 8 years, maybe, taking out loans, and then they're burdened with it. So there are a lot of things we would like to do. Transparency, accountability, those are important, and more push from employers on what ought to be in these degrees. One more quick comment. 5 or 6 years ago, I talked to the owner of a major engineering firm who said he hires engineering graduates. They've spent 5 years getting their engineering degree. It takes him 5 years to get them to the point where they're of value to him. Something is wrong with that system. If even in the engineering programs, the skills and knowledge doesn't match what the industry needs, that's very expensive to that employer. So there's a lot to be said. We need to get together some other time and talk about it. And when we have you're right, the higher education reauthorization, maybe we can come up with a better title. Maybe we should talk again as we go into the details.
That would be great. Well, I guess we'll wrap up on one final question, really coming back around to where we started, which is, I think part of avoiding people taking on a lot of debt for degrees they won't earn or aren't useful is also making sure there actually are alternatives. I mean, if the choice is college or nothing, it's hard to blame people for trying college. And so with respect to alternatives, there are obviously various apprenticeship programs out there. There are the things the Trump administration tried to do with industry registered apprenticeships that the Biden administration has now unwound. There's the Trump order on not requiring bachelor's degrees, which I know you played an important role in. I guess if you could pick one thing, what would be your top policy priority for making sure there are good alternatives out there so that people don't feel like the BA is the thing they have to be chasing?
Well, the industry recognized apprenticeship programs, or IRAP, was a very, very important leadership initiative of the Trump administration. I supported that. So yes, I think 80% of apprenticeship programs are now being handled by employers, and they're not registered apprenticeships. I think that would be good. Again, the major thing is to allow employers, invite employers into helping design programs. But I'll mention one other thing is encouraging students while they're still in high school to begin taking courses in college. Again, I'm not anti-college at all. I am pro helping students figure out what their best route is for them and doing it as early as possible. So there are a lot of academies going on with healthcare, IT, different kinds of things. But I think the state legislators need to wake up to the fact there's a lot of wasted time in high school and do more. And I'm very proud of North Carolina. Since 1974, we've had the Huskins Act, where a student could take community college courses while in high school, and they're free of charge. And that's booming in North Carolina now. So I want to say that, and other states are picking up on it. But let's start with getting students acquainted with their options early on, connect them with employers, connect them with programs. We have for-profit schools. We have short-term programs that students could get. We want to have, all of those options. The world is our oyster. We're in the most exciting time you could possibly be in education because of technology like this and so many other things that are out there that are available. So I'm excited to be involved in this right now. And I'm just hoping we'll seize the moment. And we learned from COVID how awful our education systems are from K through college. And what we need to do is take advantage of that and put in as many reforms as we possibly can.
Well, Dr. Foxx, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us and for all your leadership on this issue. I personally have learned a tremendous amount from your work and your experience that you bring to
and
this.
I've learned from you, Oren.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I'm sure I'm getting the better end of the deal, but we will continue to follow everything you're doing, and maybe we'll do another one when the renamed Higher Education Act is up for discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Oren.
All right.
God bless you.